The night that changed everything. The rain outside Los Angeles was slow and steady, tapping on the glass of the quiet house that sat on a hill overlooking the city. Inside, the faint light of a projector flickered against the living room walls. An old movie was playing, one they had both filmed together many years ago, back when they were young, uncertain, and filled with dreams they didn't yet know how to name. Keanu sat on one side of the couch, his hands folded calmly, his eyes fixed on the screen, but his mind somewhere far away. Sandra sat beside him, her body turned slightly toward him, pretending to watch the movie, but feeling every second stretch like a silent conversation they had avoided for years. She had invited him that night with a simple message. Movie night like old times? She didn't expect him to say yes, but within minutes he replied, "Sure, I'll bring snacks." Those few words made her heart race in a way she didn't expect. After everything they had lived through, the films, the fame, the heartbreaks, the losses, she never stopped admiring the quiet strength he carried inside him. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she wanted to tell him something she had buried for far too long. The sound of laughter from the movie echoed in the background, the younger versions of themselves frozen in time. Sandra glanced at Keanu, noticing how his face softened when he saw her on the screen. The way he smiled back then was the same as now, humble, kind, but guarded, like he was always holding back a part of himself. "You still remember that day?" she asked softly. He turned to her, his eyes gentle. "Yeah, I remember you couldn't stop laughing between takes," she smiled, her voice quieter. "You were the reason I couldn't." The room fell silent again. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, soft but deep. Keanu leaned back, his gaze returning to the screen. "Those were good days," he said almost to himself. "Before everything got complicated." Sandra's chest tightened. She wanted to say something, that she missed the simplicity, that she missed him, that she never stopped thinking about the way he made her feel seen even when the world didn't. But the words stayed trapped behind her lips. The movie ended and the soft hum of the projector filled the silence. Keanu stood up and stretched. "Want me to make tea?" She nodded. "Sure, same as always." "Chamomile," he said with a faint smile. "You never changed." He walked to the kitchen, and Sandra sat there, staring at the credits rolling across the wall. Her heart pounded as memories flooded her, their first table read, the long hours on set, the way he used to bring her coffee every morning without being asked. He had always been that kind of person, thoughtful, sincere, quietly caring. But she also remembered the moment years ago when she had felt something deeper than friendship, something she never dared to confess because she was afraid it would ruin everything. When he came back with 2 mugs, she smiled. "You still remember how I like it." "Some things stick," he said. "Others fade." She looked at him carefully. "And what about us?" He froze slightly at her question, then lowered his eyes. "We never faded," he said. "We just got quiet." She took a deep breath, feeling her pulse race. "I don't like the quiet anymore." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "that I miss you. Not the red carpet you, not the interviews or the smiles for cameras. I miss you. The one who used to wait outside my trailer just to make sure I got home safe." Keanu stared at her, his calm eyes softening into something more vulnerable. "You never said that before." "I never had the courage," she whispered. "You were always the one who seemed so sure of everything. I didn't want to be another complication in your life." He took a step closer, his voice low. "You were never a complication, Sandra. You were the one thing that made sense." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was heavy with years of unspoken words. The city lights outside shimmered through the rain, and the faint crackle of thunder echoed like a heartbeat. Then, as if the world slowed down, Sandra felt tears form in her eyes. "So why did we drift apart?" Keanu looked away, his jaw tightening. "Because sometimes caring too much hurts. And I didn't want to be the reason you got hurt again." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "You were going through so much back then," he said quietly. "Your breakup, the pressure, the headlines, I saw how it affected you. I wanted to protect you, but I didn't want to make things harder, so I stayed back." She felt a lump in her throat. "And all this time I thought you didn't care," he smiled faintly. "That's the funny thing about silence. It hides the truth too well." They stood there, the storm outside reflecting everything inside them, the chaos, the warmth, the fear of losing something precious. Sandra took a small step forward until they were standing close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath. "Keanu," she whispered, "if I told you that I still think about us, would it scare you?" He looked into her eyes, his expression soft but uncertain. "It wouldn't scare me, but it would make me wish I had said something first." She smiled sadly. "Maybe it's not too late." Before he could answer, a flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed by the sound of a loud knock at the door. They both turned, startled. Keanu frowned. "You expecting someone?" She shook her head. "No one." The knocking came again, louder this time. He walked toward the door, cautious. When he opened it, a man stood outside, soaked from the rain, holding an envelope. He looked nervous, like someone who didn't belong there. "Are you Sandra Bullock?" the man asked. Keanu stepped forward protectively. "Who's asking?" The man hesitated. "This is for her. It's important." Sandra took the envelope, confused. "What is this? Please read it," the man said, then turned and walked away before either of them could ask more. She looked at Keanu, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside was a letter written in elegant handwriting. Her eyes widened as she read the first line. "I'm sorry for keeping this from you all these years, but you deserve to know the truth." Keanu stepped closer. "Who's it from?" She looked up, her eyes filled with disbelief. "It's from my mother," she whispered. "But she passed away 15 years ago." Keanu's face tensed. "What do you mean? That can't be right." "It's her handwriting," Sandra said softly, "and this is her signature." The storm outside grew stronger, lightning flashing across the city. She read the next line silently, her lips trembling. Then she whispered, "She says she left something behind, something about a promise she made to someone I never knew." Keanu placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Maybe you shouldn't read it alone." She nodded slowly, her heart pounding. The letter felt heavier than paper, like it carried a secret that could change everything. They sat back on the couch together, the projector still humming faintly, the room now half lit by the storm. Sandra unfolded the second page and began to read. As her eyes moved down the lines, her face grew pale. She stopped halfway, her voice shaking. "Keanu, she mentions you." He froze. "Me?" "Yes," she said, reading again to be sure. "She says she met you once years before we even knew each other. She says she made you promise something." Keanu's breath caught. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Sandra whispered. "Because she wrote, 'If you ever meet my daughter, don't let her face pain alone.'" The thunder crashed again, louder this time, shaking the windows. Keanu's eyes darkened, memories flickering in his mind, an old woman outside a charity event years ago, her voice trembling as she thanked him for helping her up when she fell, her words strange but sincere. "One day you'll meet someone who needs your kindness more than you can imagine." He had forgotten that moment, or maybe he had tried to. Sandra looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "You knew her, didn't you?" He hesitated, his chest heavy. "I didn't know who she was, but yes, I met her." Sandra covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Keanu, what did she say to you?" He swallowed hard, his voice breaking slightly. "She told me that I would meet someone one day who would change my life. She said when that day came, I'd have to choose between protecting her and telling her the truth." Sandra's heart raced. "And you think that someone is me?" He looked into her eyes, pain and tenderness mixing in his gaze. "I don't think I know." The silence that followed was deep, almost sacred. The world outside faded away. Finally, Sandra whispered, "Then what is the truth you've been hiding from me?" Keanu lowered his head. "That night we first met on set, it wasn't an accident." The rain hit harder against the windows, the projector flickering like a heartbeat as his words hung heavy in the air. And as she looked at him, trembling between disbelief and longing, she knew the night was far from over. Something had been set in motion, something that connected their past, their hearts, and a promise made long before they ever knew each other. And for the first time in her life, Sandra Bullock wasn't sure if she was ready to know everything. The truth beneath the promise, the sound of rain, still filled the room, soft but constant, like a memory that refused to fade. Sandra sat still on the couch, the letter trembling in her hands. Keanu stood nearby, silent, his expression unreadable, the faint light from the projector glinting against his eyes. For a long time, neither spoke. It was as if the world outside had stopped waiting for their next words. "What do you mean it wasn't an accident?" she finally asked, her voice low but sharp, cutting through the quiet. Keanu hesitated. He ran a hand through his hair, his breathing slow, controlled, but his eyes betrayed something heavier, regret mixed with fear. "Your mother," he began carefully, "she came to one of my events a long time ago. I didn't know her name. She told me she had a daughter who reminded her of hope itself. She said her daughter was growing into a world that would test her heart, and she wanted someone who understood pain to cross her path someday." Sandra's eyes widened. "And she meant me?" He nodded slowly. "I didn't believe her at first. I thought she was just being kind. But she gave me a small silver pendant and told me, 'When you see her, you'll know. Just promise me you won't walk away when it matters most.'" Sandra felt her chest tighten. "And you kept that promise," he sighed deeply. I tried to, but I didn't realize how hard it would be. She looked at him with confusion. So all this time you knew something about my mother. Why didn't you tell me? Keanu sat down beside her, his voice calm but filled with pain. Because I didn't want it to sound insane. Imagine if I told you years ago that your mother made me promise to look after you. You would have thought I was lying or trying to be dramatic. She looked down at the letter again. She wrote that she believed you were different, that you would protect me from losing myself. Maybe she saw something I didn't, he said softly. Maybe she knew we'd end up here. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath. The memories of her mother came rushing back, her laughter, her advice, her quiet strength. She remembered how her mother always said that kindness was destiny, that people came into our lives not by chance but by meaning. And now, hearing Keanu's words, that belief suddenly felt terrifyingly real. She died before I could say goodbye, Sandra whispered. I spent years wishing I could ask her why she always seemed to know more than she said. Keanu looked at her gently. Maybe this letter is her way of saying it now. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. But why now? Why would this letter appear 15 years later? And why tonight of all nights? Maybe because tonight, he said, his voice calm but certain, you were finally ready to hear it. She looked at him, searching his face. Ready for what? He leaned forward, his hands clasped together. Ready to understand what she wanted you to see. That love isn't about timing. It's about recognition. We spend years walking past the people who are meant to heal us because we're not ready to face them. His words hit something deep inside her, something raw and old. She looked at him with tears threatening to spill. And you think you're the one she meant to send? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened his jacket pocket and took out something small, a silver pendant, dull with age but familiar in its simplicity. Her breath caught as she recognized it. You kept it, she whispered. I couldn't throw it away, he said quietly. Every time I thought about moving on, something reminded me of you. Your laughter, your kindness, the way you looked at people when they were hurting. It was like your mother's words were still following me. She stared at the pendant in his hand, then reached out and touched it softly. Her fingers brushed against his, and for a moment everything around them faded. You don't understand, she said with a trembling voice. I've been carrying guilt for years. I pushed people away, I avoided love, I thought I didn't deserve to be cared for. And now, hearing all this, it feels like fate played a cruel trick on me. Keanu shook his head. It's not a trick, Sandra. It's a connection that waited until you were strong enough to see it. Her tears finally fell. But it hurts, Keanu. It hurts that she's gone, and yet she somehow saw you before I did. He leaned closer, his tone softer now. She saw me because she believed love doesn't end. It just changes shape. For a while, neither of them spoke. The rain had softened outside, the city lights glowing like quiet witnesses to something sacred happening in that small living room. Sandra reached for the letter again, reading the last paragraph aloud. If you ever feel lost, remember that kindness is not weakness. And if you find someone who reminds you of calm in the storm, don't run from it. It's me, through them, telling you to trust again. Her voice broke midway. Keanu closed his eyes, his own heart heavy with the weight of what he'd carried all these years. She wanted you to trust again, he said softly. And I think she wanted me to make sure you did. Sandra wiped her tears, managing a faint smile. And what about you, Keanu? Do you still trust love? He hesitated, looking down for a moment. I don't know, he admitted. I lost a lot too. People I loved, moments I couldn't fix. But you, he looked up, his gaze locking with hers. You made me believe that maybe love isn't about what we lose. Maybe it's about what survives. She stared at him for a long moment, her heart aching. Then why do we still hold back? He smiled sadly. Because we're afraid the truth will break what's left. She looked at him, her voice trembling. And what if the truth sets it free? Keanu took a slow breath, as if gathering the courage he'd buried for years. The truth, he said quietly, is that I loved you long before I realized it. Sandra froze. The words hung in the air, tender and dangerous. Keanu, she whispered, you don't have to. I mean it, he said firmly. I loved you from the first moment we met, not the way the world expected me to. Not because you were beautiful or famous, but because you understood silence. You didn't try to fill it, you just sat with it, and that meant everything. She felt her chest tighten painfully. Then why didn't you say something before? His voice was low, rough. Because you had someone, and I thought the kindest thing I could do was stay silent. Sandra looked away, her tears spilling freely now. You always put others first. It's easier than watching someone you care about get hurt, he said quietly. For a moment, the only sound was the rain again, steady and rhythmic. She turned back to him, her eyes searching his face. "And what about now?" "Now," he said softly, "I'm done staying silent." Her lips parted slightly. The air between them changed, heavier, deeper, filled with everything they'd held back for years. But before either of them could say another word, the projector flickered suddenly, and the image on the wall changed. The screen went white, then a faint shadow appeared, a clip from an old behind-the-scenes reel. Sandra frowned. "That's not part of the movie." Keanu stood and walked closer to the projector. "Maybe it switched sources." But as the image sharpened, both of them froze. It was footage of them, young, laughing, behind the scenes of their first film. Sandra's mother stood off camera, speaking with someone holding a camera. Her voice was faint but clear. "One day she'll know. And when she does, I hope he's still there." Sandra's hand flew to her mouth. "That's her voice." Keanu stared at the screen, his face pale. "How is this even possible?" The footage faded, leaving only the soft hum of the machine. Sandra looked at him with disbelief. "That was filmed before she died, before we even realized what we were feeling." Keanu turned off the projector, his heart pounding. "Someone wanted you to see that tonight?" She looked down at the pendant still in his hand. "Then maybe this isn't just a coincidence. Maybe it's her way of finishing what she started." He stepped closer again, his eyes gentle. "Or maybe it's our turn to start something new." Sandra took a shaky breath. "Keanu, what if this changes everything? What if people find out?" "Let them," he said quietly. "For once, maybe the truth deserves to be seen." But before they could say more, her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, her hand trembling slightly when she saw the message. The text read, "Your mother's letter wasn't the only one. There's another waiting for you in the house where she grew up." She looked up at Keanu, her voice barely a whisper. "Her old house is in Virginia." He nodded slowly. "Then that's where we need to go." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I promised her," he said firmly, "and I'm not breaking that promise now." The storm outside had ended, leaving the city washed clean. The night felt heavier, yet strangely calm, like the world was holding its breath for what came next. Sandra looked at him, her eyes still wet but steadier now. "Then we go together." He smiled faintly. "Like old times?" She nodded. "No," she said softly. "Like something new." The camera of their lives had shifted once again, no longer actors, no longer bound by what was scripted. Two souls, guided by a letter from the past, walking toward a truth that waited in the silence of an old house far from the lights of Hollywood. And as they stood by the window, watching the first glimmer of dawn appear over the city, Sandra realized something she hadn't felt in years: peace mixed with fear, love mixed with destiny. The next morning would bring answers, but it would also bring a choice neither of them was ready to face. The road to Virginia the morning after the storm, Los Angeles seemed unusually quiet. The sky was soft and gray, and the smell of rain still lingered in the air. Sandra stood by the kitchen counter, packing a small bag while Keanu checked the car outside. Neither of them had slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's handwriting, the pendant, and that strange message that led them to Virginia. When Keanu walked back inside, his voice was calm but steady. "The car's ready," he said. "We can leave whenever you are." Sandra nodded. "It's been years since I went back there. I don't even know what's left." He gave her a reassuring look. "Sometimes the past waits quietly. It doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right time to be seen again." They drove through the city in silence for a while. The highway stretched long and endless before them, the hills giving way to open sky. Sandra watched the road ahead, her thoughts tangled between memories and fear. Keanu's quiet presence beside her felt both grounding and heavy. Every now and then he would glance at her, making sure she was all right. After a few hours, she finally spoke. "You really believe my mother wanted this, don't you?" Keanu nodded slowly. "She was a woman who saw things others couldn't. I think she knew this journey would bring peace to both of us." She sighed. "Peace sounds like a dream." "Then maybe we're driving toward it," he said softly. They shared a small smile before falling back into silence. Outside, the world turned from city to countryside, vast fields, old gas stations, and empty motels. Somewhere along the way, Sandra rolled down the window, letting the cold wind hit her face. It felt like breathing again after holding her breath for years. By the time they reached Virginia, the sun was setting, casting golden light over the narrow roads lined with tall oaks. Sandra's childhood town looked smaller than she remembered, almost frozen in time. Every street corner carried ghosts of laughter and loss. "Turn left here," she said quietly. "The house is at the end of the lane." Keanu followed her direction. The car slowed as they approached an old wooden gate, half covered in ivy. Beyond it stood a house that looked both familiar and forgotten. The white paint had faded and the porch creaked under the weight of the years. Sandra stepped out slowly, her heart pounding. "It feels like she's still here," she whispered. Keanu closed the car door behind him and looked around. "Places hold energy," he said, "especially when love lived there." They walked up the steps together. Sandra hesitated at the door, her hand trembling over the keyhole. "I don't even know what I'm looking for," she said softly. "Maybe not knowing is part of it," Keanu replied. She unlocked the door. It opened with a long, aching sound, like the house itself was exhaling after years of silence. Dust floated through the golden light as they stepped inside. Everything was exactly as it had been: the old clock on the wall, the faded photographs, the faint scent of her mother's perfume that seemed to linger in the air. Sandra touched the edge of the table, her eyes glistening. "She used to sit here every morning with her tea," she said. "This was her world." Keanu looked around quietly, his gaze soft. "It still feels alive." They began to explore the room slowly. Sandra opened drawers, looked under books, and checked behind picture frames. Hours passed, and nothing appeared. It felt like searching through memories that refused to be found. As evening turned to night, they sat down in the old living room, exhausted. Sandra rubbed her temples. "Maybe there's no letter," she said tiredly. "Maybe that message was just someone playing a cruel joke." Keanu shook his head. "No, not after everything we've seen." She looked at him, defeated. "Then where is it?" He leaned back, scanning the room. His eyes stopped at the old piano near the window. "Did she play?" Sandra nodded faintly. "Every night before bed. She said music helped her talk to the things she couldn't explain." Keanu stood up and walked over to the piano. He lifted the cover carefully and pressed a key. The note echoed softly, deep and warm. Then something caught his eye, a small metallic edge beneath the wooden frame. He crouched down and pulled gently. A loose panel slid open, revealing a small box wrapped in worn cloth. "Sandra," he called quietly. She stood up and hurried to him. When she saw the box, her breath caught. "That's her handwriting," she whispered, tracing the faded initials carved into the wood. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside was another letter, folded neatly, along with a photograph. Her mother standing beside a younger Keanu at a charity event, smiling. Sandra's hand shook as she held it up. "This can't be real," she said. "You look the same age you were when we first met." Keanu's face went pale. "I don't even remember taking this photo." She opened the letter, and they both leaned closer as she began to read aloud. "If you're reading this, my dear, it means the time has come for you to understand the promise I made. There was a reason I asked him to protect you. I saw something in him that reminded me of your father, not his face, but his silence. The same silence that hides kindness under pain." Sandra paused, her voice trembling. "She's talking about you?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Keep reading." "I met him once when I was very sick. He didn't know who I was. He helped me when everyone else was too busy to notice. I told him my greatest fear, that my daughter would grow up to give everything to the world and forget to be cared for herself. He promised me he would make sure she never faced that kind of loneliness." Sandra's tears fell freely now. "She trusted you before I even knew you." Keanu's voice broke softly. "She saw something in both of us before we did." Sandra turned to the last part of the letter. "If you're both reading this together, then my wish came true. You found each other again. And now you must decide if love is still something you're willing to fight for. Because protection without truth becomes distance, and love without courage becomes regret." The words hung heavy in the stillness of the old house. Sandra lowered the letter slowly, her hands trembling. Keanu spoke first, his tone barely above a whisper. "She wanted us to stop hiding. And to stop running," Sandra added, her eyes red. "From each other." They sat in silence for a while. The clock on the wall ticked softly, the rhythm almost comforting. Outside, crickets sang in the distance, and the night wrapped around them like a blanket of old memories. Finally, Keanu stood up and walked toward the window. "Your mother was right," he said. "Protection becomes distance. I thought staying quiet was noble. I thought it would keep you safe. But all it did was keep me away from the only person who ever made me feel seen." Sandra joined him at the window, the moonlight painting her face in silver. "You always think about others," she said softly. "You give and give until there's nothing left for yourself." He looked at her with quiet intensity. "And you think love is something you have to earn, but you don't. You already are it." She stared at him, her eyes glistening. "Then why are we both so scared?" He smiled faintly. "Because the strongest people are always terrified when it's real." They stood there for a long moment, the letter lying open on the piano, the photograph of her mother watching them like a silent blessing. Sandra reached out slowly, her fingers brushing his hand. He didn't move, but his grip tightened around hers, firm and trembling at the same time. "Keanu," she whispered, "do you think she somehow knew this would happen?" He nodded. "She didn't plan it, she trusted it." "That's the difference." She took a deep breath. "And now what do we do with it?" He looked out at the moonlit trees. "We finish what she started." Just as he said that, a soft sound echoed from upstairs, a faint creak like footsteps. They both froze. "Did you hear that?" Sandra asked quietly. Keanu nodded, his instincts sharp. "Stay here." But she followed him anyway as he slowly climbed the old staircase. The floorboards groaned under their weight. At the end of the hallway, a door was slightly open. Inside, the light from the moon spilled across the floor, revealing dust-covered furniture. Keanu pushed the door open fully. It was her mother's old study. Papers, books, and sketches filled the room, but something stood out, a small music box sitting on the desk. Sandra walked closer, picking it up. She turned the key gently. A soft melody began to play, the same song her mother used to hum before bed. And as the music filled the room, something unexpected happened. The bottom of the box popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small note folded in half. Sandra unfolded it, her eyes wide. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "There's one more thing you need to know. He didn't just promise to protect you. He promised to tell you the truth about what really happened the night your father died." Her breath caught. She looked at Keanu, her heart pounding. "What does that mean?" Keanu's face went pale. "Sandra, there's something I never told you." Her voice broke. "You knew my father?" He nodded slowly, the weight of years heavy in his eyes. "More than you think." And before she could ask another word, the music box stopped playing, its last note hanging in the air like the sound of a truth that could no longer be buried. The secret Keanu kept, the sound of the last piano note faded into silence. The air in the old house felt heavy, almost sacred, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Sandra stood frozen with the note still in her hand, her eyes locked on Keanu. The words she had just read echoed in her mind again and again. "He promised to tell you the truth about what really happened the night your father died." "What does this mean?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking. "Keanu, what is she talking about?" He didn't answer right away. His face was pale, his hands clasped tightly together, his body still as stone. He looked out the window for a long moment before finally turning to her. "I never wanted you to find out this way," he said softly, her throat tightened. "Find out what?" He took a slow breath, as if pulling strength from somewhere deep inside. "Your father and I met once, years before you knew me. It was the night he died." Sandra's heart dropped. She felt the world tilt slightly, her pulse racing in her ears. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible. My father died in a car accident. He was alone." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's what you were told, and technically it's true. He was alone when the car crashed, but he wasn't alone before that." Sandra stared at him, her hands trembling. "You were there." He nodded again, his voice low and steady, filled with sorrow. "I was driving behind him. We had just spoken 10 minutes earlier." She took a step back, her body trembling. "Why? How? What were you doing with him?" Keanu ran a hand through his hair, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't even know who he was when we met that night. I was still struggling, trying to find meaning in my life after losing people I cared about. Your father was at a roadside diner outside Los Angeles. He recognized me, but he didn't treat me like everyone else did. We talked for hours about life, about family, about regret. He told me about you. He said his daughter was growing up to be brave but too selfless, that he worried she'd give all her love to the world and forget to save some for herself." Sandra felt tears welling up in her eyes. "That sounds like him," she whispered. "He always said that." Keanu's gaze softened. "He reminded me of my own father, distant, quiet, but kind underneath it all. When he left the diner, he dropped his wallet without noticing. I ran outside to give it back to him. That's when it happened." His voice cracked as he spoke. "The rain was heavy. His car skidded on the curve. I tried to reach him, but by the time I got there, it was too late." Sandra covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. "You saw it happen?" He nodded, pain in his eyes. "Yes, I called for help, but the storm made everything slow. I stayed with him until the ambulance came. He was still conscious for a few minutes. He looked at me and said something I never forgot." Sandra's voice broke. "What did he say?" Keanu swallowed hard. "He said, 'Tell her I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye properly. Tell her I love her enough to let her go.'" She collapsed into the old chair by the window, sobbing quietly. Keanu stood there, unsure whether to move closer or give her space. After a long silence, she looked up at him, her eyes red. "Why didn't you tell me, Keanu? Why did you keep this from me all these years? He lowered his gaze. Because your mother asked me not to. She found out later somehow. I don't know how, but she called me after his funeral. She said she didn't want you to carry that memory. She wanted you to remember your father for his strength, not his accident. She said she'd tell you when the time was right. Sandra's voice trembled. But she never did, and then she died. He nodded. And after that, I couldn't bring myself to reopen that wound. Every time I saw you smile, I thought maybe it's better this way. Maybe she's finally at peace. But that was selfish of me. She shook her head slowly. No, Keanu, it wasn't selfish, it was kind. You carried that for me all these years. He looked at her, guilt and sadness mixing in his expression. I carried it because I couldn't forget what your father said next. Her heart pounded. There's more. Yes, he said quietly. Before he lost consciousness, he said, one day you'll meet her again. When you do, protect her from the loneliness I gave her. The room fell silent again. Sandra stared at him, her tears still falling, her hands shaking as she held the note. So that's why you promised my mother. That's why you stayed by my side all these years. Keanu nodded. I thought it was about guilt, but now I know it was about love, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. She stood up slowly, her eyes searching his face. You've been carrying everyone's pain, Keanu. My father's, my mother's, even mine. When do you let someone carry yours? He gave a faint smile. I stopped expecting anyone to. Until tonight. Sandra walked closer, her voice trembling but steady. You don't have to protect me anymore. He looked at her carefully. What do you mean? I mean, she said softly, that I'm not broken anymore. And maybe now it's my turn to protect you. For a moment he said nothing. The only sound was the rain beginning again outside, gentle and rhythmic. He looked down, his jaw tightening, his eyes glistening. You already have, he whispered. They stood close, their faces inches apart, the air between them charged with everything they'd never said. I thought love was supposed to hurt, she said quietly, but maybe it's supposed to heal. It can do both, he said. And sometimes it does them at the same time. Sandra took a deep breath. Then let's stop running from it. Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed downstairs. They both turned sharply. Keanu grabbed a flashlight from the shelf and motioned for her to stay behind him. They walked down the staircase slowly, the floor creaking under their feet. The living room light flickered again as the storm outside intensified. The front door was slightly open, wind pushing it back and forth. Keanu stepped forward, shining the light outside. Someone was here, he said quietly. Sandra frowned. Who would come all the way out here? He walked onto the porch, scanning the wet ground. Tire tracks led away from the gate. Something small and metallic lay on the steps. He picked it up. It was an envelope, clean, dry, almost as if it hadn't touched the rain at all. He handed it to Sandra. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was of her parents, young, smiling, and standing beside them was Keanu's father. Her voice shook. This doesn't make sense. How do they even know each other? Keanu's expression darkened. That's my father. I haven't seen that picture before. Sandra looked at the back of the photo. Written in faded ink were the words, "The promise began before either of you were born." Her heart pounded in her chest. Keanu, she whispered, what if this goes deeper than we thought? He looked at her, the weight of realization dawning in his eyes. Then maybe this isn't just about us. Maybe it's something our families carried for generations. The storm roared outside, the windows trembling. Sandra held the photo close to her chest, her voice soft but steady. We need to find out what they were hiding. Keanu nodded slowly. Then we start with my father. Does he know? She asked. He's alive, Keanu said quietly. But he hasn't spoken to me in years. The thunder cracked above them and the lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. In the faint beam of the flashlight, Sandra saw Keanu's face, calm, determined, but haunted. And for the first time, she realized their connection wasn't just emotional. It was bound by something much older, something neither of them had chosen, but both were destined to uncover. As the rain poured harder and the storm raged outside, Sandra whispered, Then tomorrow we go find him. Keanu nodded, his voice low. And this time, no more secrets. The meeting with the past the next morning came with the sound of birds and the faint smell of rain still hanging in the air. Sunlight cut through the thin curtains of the old Virginia house, spreading warmth across the dusty floor. Sandra sat quietly by the table, the photograph still in her hands, her thoughts tangled between fear and curiosity. Keanu was by the window, sipping coffee, lost in a silence that felt almost protective. Neither of them had slept well. The photo of their parents together had changed everything. What began as a night of memories and confessions had turned into a mystery that stretched far beyond their understanding. "He's alive," Sandra said softly, her voice breaking the morning quiet. Keanu nodded without turning around. "He lives a few hours from here, a small town near Richmond. I haven't seen him in over 15 years. And you think he'll talk to you?" He sighed. "I don't know. We didn't part on good terms, but he's the only one who can explain that picture." Sandra folded the photograph gently and placed it in her bag. "Then we have to go. Whatever this is, it's bigger than us." He turned toward her, his expression soft but firm. "Are you sure? You've already learned enough pain for one lifetime." She looked him straight in the eyes. "And you've been carrying guilt for two. I think it's time we both stopped running from ghosts." They packed their things and left the old house behind. The road to Richmond stretched long and winding through rolling hills and endless fields. The air was calm, the sky bright with scattered clouds. For the first time in days, there was no rain, only the soft hum of the car engine and the quiet rhythm of their thoughts. After an hour, Sandra broke the silence. "What was your father like?" Keanu thought for a moment before answering. "Strict, distant. But he had moments of kindness when no one was watching. He wanted me to be tough, to never show weakness. Maybe that's why I spent my life hiding what I feel." She nodded slowly. "It's strange. Our parents lived such different lives, yet they somehow crossed paths, and now here we are trying to understand what they left behind." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's life's way of finishing a conversation they never got to have." By afternoon, they reached a small rural town surrounded by tall pine trees and old brick houses. Keanu parked the car in front of a modest white home at the edge of town. The porch was covered in tools and broken chairs, the kind of clutter that belonged to someone who spent more time fixing the past than living in the present. He took a deep breath before stepping out. Sandra followed him quietly. When they reached the door, Keanu hesitated for a moment, then knocked twice. After a few seconds, the door opened. An older man stood there, tall, gray-haired, with eyes that looked sharp even beneath years of tiredness. "Keanu," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "It's been a long time." "Hi, Dad," Keanu replied softly. "Can we talk?" The old man's gaze moved to Sandra, curiosity flickering across his face. "And who might this be?" "This is Sandra," Keanu said. "We found something that might involve you. It's important." The man's expression changed slightly, not surprise, but recognition. "Sandra Bullock," he said slowly. "I haven't heard that name in years." Sandra's pulse quickened. "You knew my parents, didn't you?" He stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood and oil. Photographs lined the mantel, old and faded. Keanu's father sat down heavily in an armchair while they remained standing, uncertain where to begin. "We found this," Keanu said, handing him the photo. "You're in it with her parents." The old man studied the picture quietly for a long time. His hands trembled slightly as he traced the faces. Finally, he looked up, his voice low. "So it's come back around," he said. "I hoped it wouldn't," Sandra frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned back, sighing. "Your parents and I met long before either of you were born. Your father and I served together for a short time in Canada before he moved to the States. He saved my life once during an accident at a construction site. I owed him everything. Years later, when he married your mother, I visited them once. That's when the picture was taken." Sandra listened closely, but something in his tone suggested there was more. "You said you hoped it wouldn't come back. What were you hiding?" He looked down, his eyes heavy with regret. "Your mother wasn't just your father's wife. She was the reason I quit my job. Because she asked me to protect something, a promise that involved my son." Keanu looked stunned. "What promise?" His father turned to him, his voice trembling. "She came to me one night after your father's death. She was desperate. She said the crash wasn't just an accident. She said someone had been following him that night." Sandra's breath caught. "What? Are you saying my father was murdered?" The old man shook his head slowly. "Not exactly murdered, but forced off the road. There were people trying to silence him. Your father had been investigating a charity fund that was being misused by powerful investors. He found out something he wasn't supposed to. Your mother feared the same people might come after her or her daughter. She wanted to make sure you'd be safe no matter what." Sandra felt her knees weaken. "And you promised to protect me?" He nodded. "Yes, but I couldn't do it myself. I was already being watched, so I asked my son to keep an eye on you when the time was right." Sandra turned to Keanu, her voice barely above a whisper. "You mean," Keanu's father nodded, "that promise passed to him. That's why your mother met him years later. She already knew who he was. She trusted him because of me." The silence that followed was deep and overwhelming. Sandra felt tears fill her eyes again, her voice trembling. All this time, everything, our meeting, our friendship, even the moments I thought were random, it wasn't just chance. It was destiny. Keanu looked at her gently. Maybe destiny, maybe design. Maybe both. His father looked at them with sadness. Your parents died carrying the truth. The people behind that charity scandal never faced justice, but they were exposed years later. I kept quiet because I thought it was over. But maybe your mother wanted you to know so you could let go, not to reopen old pain, but to forgive it. Sandra nodded slowly, tears falling freely now. Forgive it, she whispered, and forgive them. The old man smiled faintly. Forgive yourself, too, that's what she would have wanted. Keanu placed a hand on his father's shoulder, their eyes meeting for the first time in years without anger. Thank you, he said quietly. His father nodded, his voice softer now. You did good, son, better than I ever could. After they left the house, the sun was beginning to set again. The light was golden, soft, the kind that made the world feel both fragile and infinite. Sandra stood beside the car, looking up at the sky. It's strange, she said. All these years I thought love was something that only lived in the present, but it turns out it's been guiding us from the past. Keanu smiled faintly. Your mother believed that love doesn't die, it just waits for us to notice it again. She looked at him, her eyes calm now, full of something deeper than sadness. And now that we've noticed it, now we don't waste it, he said quietly. As they got into the car, the air outside grew cooler, and the first stars began to appear. For the first time in their lives, neither of them felt lost. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but they finally knew where their hearts belonged. As the car rolled down the empty road, the old photograph lay on the dashboard, glowing faintly in the fading light. 4 people bound by promises, 2 still living the legacy of love that never truly ended. But just as peace began to settle over them, Sandra's phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen and frowned. The message was from an unknown number. It said, You found the truth, but not the whole of it. There's one more letter, the one your father never mailed. She looked up at Keanu, her heart pounding once again. There's another letter. He gripped the wheel tighter, his jaw set. Then we're not done yet. The headlights stretched ahead into the night, cutting through the darkness like a promise that refused to fade. The final letter, the night sky above Virginia, stretched endless and dark as they drove down the quiet road, the headlights cutting through the stillness like fragile lines of truth. Sandra sat in silence, her phone still glowing in her hand. The message had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. You found the truth, but not the whole of it. There's one more letter, the one your father never mailed. She turned to Keanu, her voice low but urgent. If my father wrote one more letter, who would have it? And why now? Keanu's eyes stayed on the road. Maybe whoever sent that message has been watching us, or maybe they've been waiting for the right time to reveal it. Waiting for what? For you to be ready, he said softly. They reached a small inn on the outskirts of Richmond and checked in for the night. The room was old but warm, with creaking floors and the faint scent of wood smoke. Sandra sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her father's photograph while Keanu unpacked quietly. Every sound in the room felt amplified, the ticking clock, the rustle of wind outside, the rhythm of her own heartbeat. What if it's someone playing with us? She said finally. Then we'll know, he replied. But if it's real, it might be the closure your father wanted you to have. She looked at him carefully. Why do you always talk like closure is a gift for everyone but you? He smiled faintly. Because for me, closure usually means goodbye. Her chest tightened. What if this time it doesn't? He didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a folded map he had found earlier. There's a small post office listed in the records near where your father worked. It closed years ago, but some archives are still there. Maybe that's where we'll find the letter. They left early the next morning. The road was narrow and lined with bare trees. Fog clung to the ground, giving everything a dreamlike stillness. When they reached the old post office, the building looked abandoned, its windows dusty, its sign faded. Yet there was something strangely peaceful about it, like it had been waiting for them. Sandra pushed open the creaking door, her breath visible in the cold air. Inside, sunlight streamed through cracked windows, revealing shelves of old papers and boxes stacked high. A single desk sat near the back, covered in cobwebs. Keanu walked ahead, brushing dust off the drawers. These are old records. Maybe the mail logs are still here. Sandra opened a wooden drawer and began searching through piles of envelopes, her hands shaking slightly. Years of untouched paper whispered under her fingers. Then deep at the back, she found something that stopped her heart. It was a sealed envelope, yellowed by time, with her name written in her father's familiar handwriting. She froze, staring at it. "Keanu," she whispered, "it's here." He turned quickly. "Are you sure? It's his handwriting, there's no mistake." She held it close for a moment, her throat tight, her hands trembling too much to open it. Keanu placed his hand gently over hers. "Take your time," he said softly. She nodded, then slowly tore the seal. Inside was a single folded page. She unfolded it carefully and began to read aloud, her voice trembling. "My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, it means the truth has finally reached you. I never wanted you to carry the pain of my choices. I made mistakes, some out of fear, some out of love. When I discovered what powerful men were doing behind the charity fund, I knew speaking up would cost me everything. I didn't do it for glory. I did it because I wanted you to live in a world where kindness still mattered." Sandra paused, wiping her tears. Keanu's eyes stayed fixed on her, his expression unreadable. She continued reading. "Before the crash, I realized I was being followed. I sent a message to your mother through someone I trusted, a young man who stopped to help me that night. I didn't know his name then, but I saw something in his eyes. Peace, strength. I asked him to promise me something to protect you when I couldn't. If you ever meet him, don't turn away. He carries my last wish in his heart." Sandra's voice cracked. "He's talking about you," she whispered. Keanu looked down, his voice soft. "He saw me for a few minutes, and somehow he trusted me more than I trusted myself." She continued reading through her tears. "And if he's standing with you when you read this, then my faith was not misplaced. Tell him he did not fail me. Tell him that in loving you, he fulfilled the promise in a way even I couldn't have imagined." Her words faltered at the end, her breath shaking. She lowered the letter slowly and looked at Keanu through her tears. He knew everything." Keanu's eyes glistened. "He gave me a purpose before I even understood what it meant." She reached out, her hands trembling as she touched his face gently. "He didn't just ask you to protect me, Keanu. He asked you to love me when he no longer could." He closed his eyes, his voice breaking. "And I did, every single day." They stood in silence, the morning light pouring through the dusty windows, the letter trembling in her hands. For the first time in years, Sandra felt the weight of her past begin to lift. "He forgave you," Keanu said quietly, "and maybe now you can forgive yourself." She nodded slowly, tears still streaming down her cheeks. "And maybe you can forgive yourself too," he smiled faintly. "Maybe we start with that." She folded the letter carefully and placed it back into its envelope, holding it against her heart. "I think this is what he wanted," she said softly. "Not justice, not revenge, just peace." Keanu took her hand, their fingers intertwining. "Then let's give him that." They walked outside together, the air fresh and cool, the fog beginning to lift. The sun broke through the clouds, spreading warm light across the fields. It felt like the world was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. As they reached the car, Sandra turned to him. "You've spent so many years keeping promises for everyone else. Maybe it's time you make one for yourself." He smiled gently. "What should that be?" She looked at him with soft determination. "That you'll let yourself be happy. That you'll let love stay instead of pushing it away." He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes glistening. "And what about you?" She took a deep breath. "I promise to stop waiting for perfect moments. I promise to choose the ones that feel real." He stepped closer, their foreheads touching. "Then let's start with this one," he whispered. The world around them seemed to fade, the sound of birds, the light breeze, the quiet hum of distant life. All that existed was the feeling of two souls finally letting go of their fears. Sandra whispered, "You kept every promise he asked you to." Keanu smiled softly. "And now I want to make one for you." "What is it?" "That no matter how far life takes us, you'll never face pain alone again." She closed her eyes, tears falling freely. "Then I'll make one too, that I'll never let you carry it all alone anymore." Their lips met softly, not out of impulse or confusion, but out of quiet recognition, the kind that only happens after years of silence and truth. It wasn't a grand gesture, it was peace. It was love finally coming home. When they pulled away, the morning light washed over them bright and golden. Sandra looked up at the sky and smiled. "I think they're watching us," she said. Keanu nodded. "And smiling too." They stood there for a moment longer, then got into the car and began the drive back, the letter resting on the dashboard between them. The road ahead was open, winding, and endless, just like life, just like love, just like the promises that never truly die. As the wind blew through the open window, Sandra whispered to herself, "When love is real, it doesn't end with goodbye, it ends with peace." Keanu reached over and took her hand again, holding it tightly. "And maybe," he said softly, "that's what we were always meant to find." And as they drove into the horizon, the last page of their shared story closed quietly, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Because sometimes, the most beautiful endings are the ones that finally feel like beginnings.